Welcome to the shop, Steve here at SKS Props, and in today's video we're putting together a retro style Wolfman mask. Now this guy goes in conjunction with the Frankenstein mask that I put out not long ago. The thing that's awesome about both these builds, I have free templates available over at sksprops.com, so you can download those and build right along with me. Now with this guy, he's made primarily out of my 2mm and 6mm HD foam, which you of course can find over at Blick Art Materials. We've got a lot to do to assemble him, so let's go ahead and get started. This was my proof of concept Wolfman mask that I had used to make the final templates that you can download at sksprops.com. I transferred the main face template onto some 6mm HD foam with a pencil and cut it out using a utility knife. After the mouth, I switch over to a small X-Acto blade to cut out the eyes. These dart areas are going to be glued together using contact cement, and this is what's going to give our mask a curve at the top. A thin layer of contact cement is applied to both sides, and scrap foam is used to remove any excess. After the adhesive had been allowed to dry, both sides were firmly pressed together. You can see that after all three sections have been glued together, it creates a slight curve at the top of the mask. Moving on, I trace more of the facial accessories onto some 6mm HD foam. Go ahead and cut all these pieces out normally. The only exception is going to be on the ears. The section that will stick to the side of the mask needs to be cut at a 45-degree angle. This will make sure that the ears lay back and won't stick straight out. After all these pieces have been cut out, I cleaned up the edges and round them over using a rotary tool. The muzzle's placement is lightly marked onto the face of the mask using a pencil. Super glue is applied to the top, but not to the sides, and that's because the fur that we're going to cut out will go under this piece. Let's go ahead and move on to the fur. The templates for these are traced onto some 2mm HD foam with a pencil. This main fur pattern is transferred 8 times onto the foam and then cut out. Now the process of cutting out all these pieces is going to take a while, and if you mess up, don't worry about it because it's supposed to look like organic fur anyway. After I'm done with the main fur pieces, I move on to the ones that will cover up the seams and attach to his chin. Now that all the fur has been cut out, it's time to move on to the ears. The placement of the ears is lightly marked with a pencil and then super glued into place. Again, you can see how that 45-degree cut keeps the ears from sticking straight out. With our ears in place, now it's time to attach our fur, and if you notice, this first piece kind of hooks behind the ear, and then I lightly mark where it's going to go on the face. Super glue is added and then pressed on, and then I mirror that piece to the opposite side. I take some scissors and I cut off this little bit of extra that we don't need. The next piece layers on top, slightly above the ear, and you can see where it tucks under the muzzle. And just like before, this layer is also marked, glued, and then mirrored to the opposite side. Once the second piece has been attached, go ahead and glue the muzzle down on top of the fur. Next up, we're going to work on the lower jaw. The main 2 teeth are attached to the jaw, but we're going to cut out some smaller ones from 2mm HD foam. The template for these is traced onto some 2mm foam and then cut out and attached to the back of the jaw. You can see where there's an open area where you're going to put some super glue, and then the lower jaw is glued into place. After that's complete, go ahead and glue the tops of the 2 larger teeth down to the muzzle. The smaller teeth for the upper part of the mouth are cut to fit and then marked where they need to go. Super glue is added, and you can see how the teeth slightly come out underneath the muzzle. The next step is pretty straightforward. Go ahead and take the lip template and super glue that right along the top edge of the jaw. The fur detail can now be added. Go ahead and glue your first piece about midway down the jaw. The second piece will be glued right up underneath of the lip. Once complete, go ahead and take your smallest chin template and glue that right in the middle. To help the lower part of the mask keep its shape, we're going to take a strip of 2mm foam, and while the mask is curved, it is glued into place. This additional strip will make sure that the foam keeps this shape. Next up, I take the nose piece, mark where it needs to go, and glue that into place. Now we're going to move on to the fur at the top of the head. All of these pieces are going to cover up our seams. You can start off by gluing the medium-sized one at the top, right in the middle. Once that's in place, go ahead and take the next larger fur piece, mark where it needs to go, and glue that right next to it. You can see how this piece slightly tucks behind the ear. Go ahead and mirror this on the other side. Take another one of the medium pieces and glue that right in the middle, overlapping the previous one. Another fur section will slightly overlap this and then wrap around to the top of the ear. And again, repeat the same thing for the opposite side. I have one more of those medium-sized pieces that will overlap right in the middle. The eyebrow pieces are slightly rounded with my hand and then placed onto the mask. Now if you notice, the eyebrows do not go straight across. They go up at an angle just a little bit to give him an angry look. I also want you to notice that the eyebrows wrap around the curve of the mask. This will also help it retain that shape. I take the last little fur piece and I glue it right in between the eyebrows. The eye templates are cut out of some 2mm HD foam. These are lightly marked with a pencil of how far down they're going to come into the socket and then glued into place. So you all can see I'm done with the fabrication side of my Wolfman mask. Now the biggest thing I wanted to achieve with this build was to keep him stylistically the same as what I had done for Frankenstein. And that reminds me, if there are particular characters that are out there that you think would look super cool in this oversimplified stylistic manner, go ahead and leave those suggestions down in the comments section. I'll see what I can do. Now it's time to move on to paint. And to paint him, I'm going to be using the brand new FX line from Plaid. I'm going to be using the primer and paints in conjunction. We still have a lot to do with this guy, so let's go ahead and jump into the painting process. The Plaid FX primer is applied with a large flat brush. This will help minimize my brush strokes. This primer is applied to the entire piece, and then a hairdryer is used to speed up the drying process. For the flesh parts of this Wolfman mask, I'm going to be using FX brand Desert Sand. This paint is also applied with a large flat brush. Now it goes on a little thin, so 2 coats are going to be needed. I'm not worried about getting this paint onto the fur parts because the brown I'm going to use will cover pretty well. Once the main sections have been painted, I then switched over to a little filbert brush to fill in all the smaller areas. For the fur, I'm going to be using the FX brand Charred Root. I start the painting process once again with the large flat brush. Now I'm not getting all the way to the edge because I'm going to clean that up later on. The paint is applied pretty thick and I try to pull in the direction of the fur. That way if there are any brush strokes, it'll look like it's part of it. After the mask had been painted, I used a hairdryer again to speed up the drying. I lightly glue a small piece of foam to the inside of the mask, that way I have something to better hold on to. Since the front is pretty much dry, the back and the sides can now be painted. Switching over to my smaller filbert brush, I start to work on the edges of the fur. I'm being very mindful as I work around the perimeter not to get this brown onto the desert sand that's already there. After all those sections have been painted, I then switch over to a very tiny detail brush and paint the sides of the 2mm foam. Once the fur was complete, I switched back over to Desert Sand to paint his bottom lip and cover up any mistakes. For the Wolfman's nose, we're going to be using FX brand Carbon. This color is painted onto the top and the sides of his nose, making sure not to get it on the skin. For his eyes, I'm going with FX brand Fool's Gold. Just like the nose, I use a small filbert brush, being mindful not to get it anywhere else. Now for his teeth, I'm using FX brand Blizzard. Just like before, the lighter paints are kind of thin, so this is definitely going to need 2 coats. The first layer is applied to all the teeth, and a hairdryer is used to lock it in. That way it can move right on to the second coating. I'm I'm going to be using the chiffon cloth again to black out his eyes. A small bead of low-temp hot glue is put down and the fabric is lightly pressed into place. Once the bottom had set up, I could then glue around the top. This process was then repeated for the second eye. I use some scissors to trim away the excess fabric, then I go back with more hot glue to secure the edges. 1-inch stretch nylon is going to be used for my adjustable strap along with some tri-glides. I cut the nylon to approximately 11 inches and glue one end of it around the tri-glide. Once both nylon strips have the tri-glides on the end, they can then be threaded through each other to make the adjustable strap. The ends of the straps are hot glued just above the eyes on either side of the mask. Once they're in place, some additional hot glue is added just to make sure they don't go anywhere. I glue in a block of upholstery foam right above the eyes to give the mask a little more comfort and to keep it away from my face. For the last step, I take some of the black cloth that I had used to black out the eyes and I cut it to fit for the mouth. This fabric is hot glued into place and secured. So you guys can see the steps that it takes to assemble the templates to make my retro style Wolfman mask. Now hopefully you guys are loving this Halloween content, and if you are, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family, and remember, if you're building any of my builds or using HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKS Props on Twitter and Instagram because I love seeing your progress. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD foam.